understanding and managing gay and transgender issues in the workplace. Described by the New York Times as the godfather of gay sensitivity training, Brian McNaught is a certified sexuality educator who has been presenting to corporate and university audiences throughout North America and Europe since 1974. He has regularly been seen on public broadcasting stations, and his books are often used as college texts.
Thank you for inviting me to come today to offer you a perspective on gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender workplace issues. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender workplace issues. The reason I'm here is that your company, like all competitive companies, wants to create a safe and productive work environment. And they see understanding differences between employees and bridging those differences as an essential means of creating an environment in which everyone feels safe and valued. So far together? Good. Okay, let me give you a little bit of background on my perspective so you know where I'm coming from, and then we'll talk more about this corporate effort to create a competitive, highly productive work environment. I was born in 1948. I'm the middle child of 7 Irish Catholics. I'm the product of 16 years of Catholic education. It would have been 17, but there was not a Catholic kindergarten in Flint, Michigan, so I went to public school for 1 year. I'm certified as a sexuality educator, which is not something that my parents thought about when they were raising me. They didn't, in this Irish Catholic household, that we raise our son to be a sex educator, and it's not a degree that I got at Jesuit Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's something that happened to me later in 1974. At the age of 26, I acknowledged a secret that I had had ever since I was very, very little. And that secret was that I have always known that I was, and at the time we didn't have the word gay, that I was attracted to men or I was a homosexual. And that word scared me to death. It created shame and fear, but I knew that I had to finally acknowledge that. As a result of acknowledging it, I lost a lot at that time. I lost some family support. I lost a lot of friends. I lost my job. And I lost my career potential, at least in terms of what I had aspired to be, which was the religion editor of the New York Times back in 1974. But it set me off on a journey that I have no regrets about, that I'm very excited about, of doing public education through speaking and writing and creating videos about gay issues. And mostly what I have done in the 30-plus years that I've been doing this work is putting a face on the issue. And that's what I would like to do with you today. Now, the face that I'm going to be putting on the issue of today's topic is a face of a gay man. I'm not transgender. And I'm self-conscious about the fact that I'm going to be trying to do some education on that, and I'm not coming from that perspective. But there is a real link between these issues, and I'd like to help us together make the link and better understand the topics, all of them, so that we're better able to respond to them. But that's the perspective that I come from. In terms of our goal of creating a safe work environment and doing so through a diversity presentation, let's offer, if I can, the analogy of a tug of war, because our introduction talks about the fact that we're trying to create a safe and productive work environment, and to do so we have to create a space in which people feel valued and welcomed. You all agree with that? Think of your company as in a tug of war with another company. It's a very simple metaphor, but for me it works, and I think it will for you too. And you know, in a tug of war you have a rope, and both teams are pulling on the end of the rope, and the team that pulls together most effectively as a group, as a team, wins, right? So you have 10 people from your company on this tug of war, and your competitor does too. 100 years ago, if you looked at the hands on the rope, they looked a lot alike, right? Most of the hands were white and male, right? And Christian identified and heterosexual identified, right? And getting that group of 10 people to see their common values was not all that big a challenge. Oh, they had some differences. Some were Irish, some were Italian. But that was not the kind of challenge that we face today in our multicultural workforce and world. The hands on the rope today are black and brown and red and yellow and white, right? They are Christian, which takes in all kinds of groups, as you know, not all of whom agree. Muslim, right? Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, agnostic, atheist, all of whom want us to know who they are. You know, people are not keeping that to themselves today. People are proud of their being a Muslim or a Jew, right? So they're telling us that they're on the rope. We have women on the rope today, and we have men on the rope, and we have gay people on the rope. Now, gay people have always been on the rope, but they're now telling us they're there, right? And we've got people who identify as transgender on the rope, and we have older workers and younger workers and people, you get the feeling, right? Well, how do you get them to pull together as a team? Because if one of them out of the 10 decides that he or she is unhappy with the other 9 and shows up at work and doesn't really give it all their energy and focus, then the competitor who has worked harder perhaps at creating a safe work environment for these 10 is going to have the competitive edge. That's what competition is all about right now. That's what all of the mission statement is about in all the companies with which I've done training. Everyone's talking about teamwork today. Well, how do you get all 10 of these people on the rope to pull together as a team? Well, you promise them something. You promise them at the end of the day they're going to be evaluated on the basis of their skills and performance and no other factor. Not their gender, not their religion, not their skin color, right? Not their sexual orientation. We don't care about any of that. We care about how do you pull for the team. And so in order to prove to them that we're going to take this seriously, we create policies. We have non-discrimination policies that put it in print. We will not discriminate against you based on your race, creed, color, etc., etc. We have codes of conduct to assure these people. We have mission statements, right? We have all of these things. Okay, several years ago, a major corporation with all of what we've just described, non-discrimination policies, codes of conduct, etc., was tape recorded at a board meeting, executives using derogatory language about African Americans at a board meeting that was tape recorded, and the tape recording made it into the headlines. And these headlines were spread not only across newspapers in the United States, but throughout the world. I want you to imagine the black hands on that rope the next day. You get up in the morning, you're heading off to work early because you normally get to work early because you're a faithful employee and you work late, you want to prove yourself. Sometimes when you're the black or gay or female or other minority person, you show up earlier and work harder because you feel like you have to prove that you're not just as good as, but better than, right? So you're about to head out the door and you read this article about the place that you work and how your bosses, despite all of these statements, saying to you you're going to be safe and valued, are talking about you in a derogatory way. The question that I ask you is, how hard do you pull on that rope that day? This is not, and it wasn't just black people at that company who let go of the rope. The Latinos and Asians and women and Jews and gay people said if they're talking about them like that, how are they talking about me? How do they feel about me? So not only were people less inclined to pull on the rope, but they started to think about whose rope they might prefer to pull on, what other team they might prefer to pull with, right? This is not just about attracting the best and brightest people. This is about retaining the best and brightest people, right? So what was going on there? What was going on? You had great words to make the promise, but the environment wasn't as safe as people promised. I have a great metaphor for you that I'd like you to think about in the time that we've got together that helps us make the distinction between what happened in that company and what we're trying to challenge here, because you all have great policies too. Everywhere I work, they have great policies. You know, many people have policies that not only cover sexual orientation, but also gender identity and expression, right? So they have great policies. But is the environment safe and welcoming for these employees who have been made this promise? The metaphor is the difference between words and music. Have you ever been in a car and listened to a new song on the radio, or been at somebody's home for dinner and they had a new CD, or maybe you went to a Broadway musical and you loved a particular song, and you left the theater, or you left the car or the dinner party, and you started to sing the song that you heard that you liked so much? Have you ever had that experience? And if you're like me, you had the tune down perfectly. You know, you name a tune, I can give you perfect tune. But I generally end up making up the words because I can't remember the words. Do you do the same thing? Even songs you have been singing since you were a kid, the words are probably nowhere near what they originally were intended because you don't remember the words. So you get the difference between words and music. Okay, so a company has words, and those are what are in its policies. But the company also has music, right? Would you agree that in your own company, if you went from site to site, office to office, right, in terms of different parts of the country, you'd experience a different atmosphere than you would perhaps at another site? Why? You've got the same exact words that are supposed to be dictating our behaviors. Why is the music so different? Well, because we're the ones who create the music, aren't we? I mean, we're the ones who either abide by the policies or not. And how do we create music? I mean, we all have music. Everyone in this room has music, don't you? I mean, one of the things I'm doing as I look out around the room is I'm looking for people who are nodding and smiling. That's music, isn't it? Because you're feeding me by saying, I'm with you, Brian. That's your music. You don't have to say a word. And you all have had this experience. You've been on an airplane, and one look at the flight attendant told you, do not ask for a pillow. Right? Right? You didn't need to be told. There was no announcement, don't ask for pillows. You just looked at this person and thought, okay, never mind. Right? Right? I've had people say to me, how come my son told their Aunt Martha that they were gay before they told me? And how do you say to this person in a non-upsetting or threatening way, because Aunt Martha's music said, I love you no matter who you are, even if you don't use actual words, right? And all of you have had people in your life, parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles or the parent of a good friend whose house you always wanted to go to when you were a kid because their music was so embracing, it was so warm and wonderful. And so one of the things I'm going to ask you to think about today is, what's your music? You know, what's your music on this issue? You know, what's your music on gay issues? If I was in your presence and you didn't know that I was gay, would I pick up from you that you were a welcoming person, somebody who wanted me to be able to tell you about the most important person in my life, Ray, if I had the opportunity? Or is your music going to suggest to me that, no, I don't want to hear anything? Okay? Because that's how we're going to make a change in our ability to create a tug-of-war team, right, that feels like it really is a group. And you know that though the words I'm using today are about gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, we could be substituting race, gender, religion, disability, all those, we're still talking about the same issue. What music do people of color pick up at this company? Right? What music do older workers get? What music do fundamentalist Christians get in terms of respect for their beliefs? Right? What's the music? Right? Because our investment is to create music in which everyone feels mutually respected. Now, that doesn't mean we all agree or even like each other. You know, this does not mean that suddenly everyone's best friends. I mean, there are misnomers about that. There are going to be gay people you're not going to want to work with, not because they're gay, just because they're not all that easy to be around, right? I mean, that's true for all of us, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to change your personal moral values. Some of you may think, you know, personally, I feel that homosexual behavior is morally wrong. Just as I think that abortion is wrong, or divorce is wrong, or any religion outside of my own is wrong. But that doesn't mean that you can't be on the rope with your colleagues, pulling together as a team, refraining from engaging in behaviors that are unprofessional and counteractive to our goal of creating mutual respect for one another, which means you don't tell jokes about one another, you don't put each other down, you don't make it difficult for each other to sing their song, to tell who they are, right? So this is not about anyone changing their personal core values. It's about embracing the corporation's core value, as long as you work here, of treating everyone with mutual respect with the goal of being competitive. Does that make sense? Okay, so how come our music is all over the place? How come, and it is, you know, I was doing a training for a major company in Buffalo, New York, and the people there had to be at my presentation. It was required. And there was a person sitting in the front row who wouldn't look at me for 2 hours. You know, her arms were crossed, you know, her head was shaking, and it was red. I sort of knew how she felt about being there. And that was okay for me. I've learned to not get drawn to that person. I used to get drawn to that person thinking I had to work all day to try to unfold those arms, and then I was leaving the rest of you behind. So I've learned to let go of the person, but I always am worried about the gay or lesbian person who works for that person and is terrified of coming out, or who happened to be in the audience watching me and watching her at the same time thinking, I'll never be able to tell her who I am. She was creating music. She was doing it as a protest to let me know she disapproved of my being invited. But I get on a plane and go home. You know, it may hurt my feelings temporarily, but it's creating problems in the workplace that has a policy that prohibits that sort of bad music. Right? Why did she have her arms crossed? Well, my experience is that she probably had never had the opportunity to listen to or talk to somebody who was gay. I mean, this is my theory on our levels of fear. I think that most of us are afraid, generally, of what we don't understand. My anxiety goes up when I'm in a situation that I don't feel qualified to respond to. For instance, how many of you have ever been to a foreign country and not known the language, if you'd raise your hand? It can be intimidating, can't it? Even in England, it can be intimidating. Right? I hate asking, I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? And it's my problem. You know, it's my ears. It's not their problem. But in England also, you're dealing with which way is the traffic flowing. You know, watch before you step out onto the curve, right? The money's different. So that raises anxiety. And it does for all of us on all sorts of issues. And it's not that we're stupid, it's just that we haven't been exposed to a subject, right? When I went to France for the first time, and I spoke no French, right? And I found out that poulet meant chicken, so I ordered it every meal, because it was the only thing that I felt comfortable doing, right? You learn a few more words, and then you're a little bit more excited about going back, aren't you? Because you feel like, okay, I can manage this. A lot of us are unconsciously incompetent. You see this wonderful graph there, unconsciously incompetent. We don't know that we don't know. And we don't know because we were never exposed to information about something. Let me give you an example. One of my best friends in the world is an African-American woman, and when I do a 4-hour workshop or an 8-hour workshop, she co-facilitates with me. Her name is Pam. She's heterosexual. And Pam came back from a vacation one time, and I sort of pride myself with being good on diversity issues, right? So she comes up to me, having just come back from a Caribbean cruise, and she says to me, so what do you think? And I said, what do I think about what? And she said, what do you think about my suntan? And I thought, this is a trick question. And she said, Brian, you don't mean to tell me you cannot see my suntan. And I said, Pam, I am so sorry. She said, Brian, look at this. So she pulled off, her strap, and I said, wow. See, I was never taught. It was not part of my consciousness that people of color, you know, would go try to get a suntan. I knew I wanted to because I'm pale, right? But she loves suntan, and now that I immediately became consciously incompetent, right? I mean, she told me something, and so I was conscious of my incompetence, right? But now, when she comes back from vacation, I have an eye that's trained to say, wow, great tan. And she beams, you know, she's more comfortable because now somebody understands and celebrates with her. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. I was doing a presentation one time at a major corporation, and the head of HR came up to me and he said, Brian, I think we do a terrific job here with alternative lifestyles. Now, he didn't know this because he was unconsciously incompetent, but the terminology alternative lifestyles is like fingernails on a chalkboard to a gay person. It is. I'm not. It's like the television talk show host who asked me, Brian, when did you decide to be gay? I said, oh, that day I decided to be condemned by the church, kicked out of my family, fired from my job. I thought it'd be fun. What are you thinking, right? But he was unconsciously incompetent. And I said to him, and we have to have a sense of humor about this, right? Pam didn't get angry at me because I didn't see the suntan, you know? We have to have a sense of humor and patience about all of this, all issues of diversity. We're on a journey together, right? No one's being deliberately mean. Most people aren't, right? Some are, but they're frightened, right? I said, can this be a teachable moment? I said to this person, head of HR at this company. He said, sure. And I said, being gay is not an alternative lifestyle. I said, alternative sounds like I had an option, and lifestyle sounds like we all have sort of the same life. Everyone who's gay, you know, our homes look the same. I mean, I think that's what people think. How is the gay community voting? Well, we all get on the phone, you know. Houston, are you there? There is no lifestyle. There's no black lifestyle, Jewish lifestyle, right? He said, well, what is an alternative lifestyle? I said, swinging. That's an alternative lifestyle, but that's a behavior that you engage in, see? And if I never have sex my whole life, I'm still gay, right? So it's not a lifestyle, it's a life, right? So why are there things that we don't know about? Well, because our parents, who did the best job they could, didn't tell us about it, right? And they didn't tell us about it because they probably got the message from their parents that acknowledging difference is not okay. It's not okay to acknowledge difference. When you're around 5 years old, and if any of you have a child around 5 or a grandchild around 5, and you're walking down the street with this child, and the child sees something that's very different for it. Perhaps it's a person who has a white cane who's walking down the street, obviously touching things, and he's never seen this before. Or perhaps it's a person in a wheelchair, or perhaps it's a person of another color. And the child points, right? They're not discreet. Point. And they say, Mommy, how come? Right? And then they ask this question in a voice loud enough for the entire block to hear, right? And what does Mom and Dad say in reaction to this question? That's exactly right. Do you know what? Shush is a universal language. It is. I've had the privilege of doing training in Europe, and I'll ask them the same question, and they'll say shush. Parents say shush, which means you're embarrassing me. Be quiet. Isn't that what shush says? Be quiet, you're embarrassing me. So the child sits there and thinks, I know that person's different, but I'm told not to acknowledge it. So now what happens? Well, unless somebody changes that message, you grow up and you go into the workplace, and you're surrounded by people who are different than you, right? A lot of us encountered difference for the first time in the workplace. And you know you're not supposed to ask about it because Mom and Dad said it's impolite. And so what do we often do when we're around things that we don't understand and we can't ask about? Well, we make fun of it to decrease our level of anxiety, and we avoid it, don't we? I mean, how many of you know how to shake hands with somebody who is blind? Okay, so here's a blind person, right? And people in this room are walking around shaking hands. My theory is that the blind person is normally avoided because people are afraid of making a mistake, right? And I think we do this with the Indian woman, right? And with the gay person, and I know we do it with the transgender person. You know, I was walking down the hallway in one company with a transgender person who was my host, and I watched everyone walk by and nod at me and say good morning, but they didn't to this person with me. They weren't being hostile in their own mind, they just didn't know how to handle the situation. Ray, my partner, who worked as a managing director at a Wall Street firm for many years, was openly gay at work. And he would come to work on Monday morning and he would watch his colleagues say to each other, hey, Bill, how's Mary? How was your weekend? Oh, Susan, how's Dick? How was your weekend? But they never asked him about his weekend. Because they liked Ray, they weren't hostile, they just didn't know what they were going to get. Oh, Brian and I had sex. That's the fear, isn't it? So I'm not going to ask, right? Brian and I went to a movie, right? Oh, what movie? But you never get there because the fear is that if I ask a question, it's like if I start speaking a couple words of Spanish to somebody who's Spanish speaking, they're going to come back real fast at me and I'm going to get lost, so I'm not even going to bother, right? So we back off from that with which we feel uncomfortable, right? And that's that unconscious incompetence. Well, I was doing a program. Incidentally, I'm going to tell you the answer to how to shake hands with a blind person in a moment. I was doing a workshop at a major corporation, and there was a man in the room with a very large thumb. And I watched him throughout the workshop to see what his comfort level was, because I figure, reading people's body language, that if he had his hand in his pocket, most of the time, that he was uncomfortable having it be looked at. But he didn't. He had his hand right out there on his lap. So at the end of the day, people will often come up and go to shake hands, and he was the last one to leave the room, and I put my hand out, and he shook my hand, and I said, can I ask you about your thumb? Now, if my mother had been in the room at that moment, she would have been mortified. I didn't teach you to ask people about their thumbs. And I'm not recommending that you go out of the room and do that immediately. You have to sort of check, why am I asking the question? What's the person's music? Are they inviting questions about themselves? But I know from my own journey that I want people to talk to me about what they don't understand about my journey, because it's the only way we're going to get past it. Once we get past it, then we find out what we have in common. But until you ask the questions, your minds are filled with crazy ideas about what a gay person is, right? So I said to him, can I ask you about your thumb? He said, yeah, Brian, it's a birth defect. And I said, was it okay to ask you about your thumb? He said, oh, God, Brian, I'm so glad you did. He said, I've worked here 11 years, and no one will ask me about my thumb. He said, so, Brian, I'm the guy with the big thumb. I'm not Bob. And they will never know Bob because they can't get past the thumb. See? So the music is not what people intended, but it's what they created out of their anxiety, right? Their unconscious incompetence. And we can get past that. We don't have to be stuck with the music that we have. My music keeps changing as I learn more information. The more exposed that I get to a subject, right, the more comfortable I become with it. If ignorance is the parent of fear, then information, what must be? The parent of acceptance, right? Or comfort. Again, you don't have to embrace a different value other than the value of, can we all work together with mutual respect and comfort? Right? I was also doing, and this brings in the blind person, I was doing a presentation at a diversity conference, and I was sitting next to somebody who was blind, and it was one of those great conferences where everyone was feeling very relaxed. Because there were all these great diversity presentations. I love diversity. I really do. I love looking at more than one side of the menu. Life is such an incredible feast, and if you're frightened, you just order off this little tiny section because you're so afraid, to venture out. But when you start meeting people who are different than you, it just encourages you to think about life as just this incredible banquet, right? So I was sitting next to this guy at this diversity conference, and everyone was in one of those join hands and sing kumbaya moods, because we were all feeling so good. And so I said to him, can I ask you a stupid question? He said, what's that? I said, I don't know what to do when I meet somebody who's blind. I'd like to shake your hand, but I don't know how. And he said, Brian, if more sighted people would only ask those kind of questions, I wouldn't feel so isolated. It's good to ask questions. I know it's scary because mom's on your shoulder or dad's on your shoulder saying shush, right? But it's good to ask questions because it gets us past our fears. He said, I can't speak for all blind people. He said, some people will just lift their hand and you take it, but I'd prefer you tell me you're about to take my hand. So I said, okay, I'm about to take your hand. And I reached down and I grabbed his hand and my confidence level went up because I felt like I had done something new, right? So I said, can I ask you another dumb question? And he said, what's that? He said, I said, would you like to know what we're having for dinner? And he said, that's a wonderful question. He said, when the plate comes, tell me what the food is, and think of my plate as a clock, and tell me where the food is according to the time of day, right? Doesn't that make sense? And then I can find the food on my own. Well, I got so excited I started looking for blind people to introduce myself to. I thought, all right, I'm sure I terrorized the blind community for 2 years. But I was so excited about learning new things, right? And that's what this is about. That's how we get past our unconscious incompetence. And just a quick poll on the issue that we're going to be talking about today, because this is, sexuality. Wow. How many of you grew up in a house that had a book that talked about sexuality and that your folks talked about sexuality in a comfortable way, if you'd raise your hand? Couple of you, 3, 4, 5. And some of you, when I've called on this, say, well, I'm not from this country. Or my mother was, worked for Planned Parenthood or something. Most of us did not, right? I mean, I grew up in a family, Irish Catholic family, 7 kids. You never said the word pregnant. People weren't pregnant. They were in a family way. Well, how do you get in a family way? You go tell your father you asked me that question, right? Right? Most of us did not grow up in families that talked about sexuality in a comfortable way. We were supposed to, I don't know where we were supposed to learn about it, but we were supposed to learn about it from someone else, and when the time was right? Which I think was after we said, I do. Then we were suddenly supposed to have this new information that was supposed to come to us. How many of you grew up in a school where you got officially sanctioned sex education? You got a good sex education in school, if you would. Few more, and that's what Gallup says. Gallup says that about 10% of us feel maybe that we got a good one at home, maybe 15% say at school. But most of us, I went to an all-boys Catholic prep school taught by the Christian Brothers of Ireland. And in my senior year, finally, we got some mention officially of sexuality. It was a half-an-hour film from the Navy on gonorrhea, and that's all we got. And of course, what did everyone say, They're looking for a half an hour at all of these diseased, bodies. I'm never having sex, right? Which is exactly why they showed us the film, right? So here we are in the workplace, and we didn't get much education besides that, except maybe, from an older friend or play on the playground or graffiti in a bathroom, right? And we're in the workplace, and we have a company that says we're not going to discriminate on the basis of a person's sexual orientation or their gender identity or expression. Wow. What context are we supposed to put that in? How are we supposed to be comfortable with that when no one's ever bothered to talk to us about it? That's why we have these kinds of sessions, because you can't have any more policies. There's no more policies to write on this or any other issue, right? I mean, we've got enough words. The only way music is going to change is if we get the opportunity, all of us, to get past the shush and get past the unconscious incompetence, or at least to learn that we're unconsciously incompetent. Some people don't even know on this topic that they're unconsciously incompetent. So today really is about putting a face on the issue so that we can lower the anxiety and increase the confidence level so that your music can change if you want to change your music. And I hope you do. And I hope on all issues we want to change our music so that we work with the company to be on that rope, to pull more effectively, right? And have a greater success of attracting and retaining the best and brightest people. When Ray left his firm, my partner left his firm, they hired a consultant to contact some of the executives who were thought to be best and brightest who left early. And they said to Ray, so why did you leave the company? And he said, because I felt tolerated. I didn't feel accepted. And I think that a lot of people struggle with that. And the question is there some place else that I might go? you know, that I'm going to feel more affirmed for who I am. So today is about that. So anything you want to ask today, anything you want to ask, the goal is lower that anxiety, increase that confidence so that the music changes.